Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for our Regional Reflections on Green Infrastructure and Nature-Based Solutions series. Today, we will be featuring green infrastructure projects from the Mid-Atlantic and Chesapeake Bay. I'm Rebecca Eicher, a project director with the American Association for the Advancement of Science's Center for Scientific Evidence in Public Issues, also known as the AAAS EPI Center. The AAAS EPI Center's mission is to bring clear, concise, and actionable scientific evidence to decision makers, and we're honored to be co-hosting this conversation about green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in partnership with our colleagues from the US EPA Office of Water and the White House. This discussion is an opportunity to hear about successes, challenges, and opportunities from the design and planning phases to implementation to operations and maintenance of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in Washington, D.C. and the Chesapeake Bay region. We have a great lineup of speakers today, and I'm happy to introduce one of our partners from the US EPA Office of Water, Clark Wilson, who will share about the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you and the Epicenter staff, particularly Aaron Sable, for organizing this webinar series. And hello to all of you, and thanks for joining. And thank you particular to the speakers for your time and your insights that you're going to give today. As Rebecca said, the series is done in conjunction with EPA Office of Water and the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative. The collaborative is a community of practice comprising over about a dozen federal agencies that all work in the field of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. The collaborative members work closely to align knowledge and resources to help communities build the capacity and maximize the environmental, the economic, and the social benefits of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And as of late, the collaborative has really been focusing on strategies that foster climate resilience and encourage equitable implementation of green infrastructure for all. So I just put a link in the chat to the collaborative website where you can learn more about activities and link to some of the past webinars that we've been doing. But for right now, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, David J. Hayes. Mr. Hayes is the Special Assistant to the President for Climate Policy in the White House Climate Policy Office, and is a senior member of the National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy's White House team. This is the team that is advancing the Biden administration's climate, conservation, and green energy priorities. On the White House team, Mr. Hayes manages the resilience portfolio of 5 interagency working groups on climate-related hazards, including drought, wildfire, extreme heat, flooding, and coastal resilience. Immediately prior to joining the White House, Mr. Hayes was the executive director of the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center at NYU School of Law, where he worked with state attorneys general on climate, environmental, and clean energy initiatives. He was previously served as the Deputy Secretary and Chief Operating Officer at the US Department of Interior for both Presidents Obama and Clinton. And he was a climate policy advisor for the Biden-Harris transition in 2020 and led the Energy and Environmental Agency reviews for the Obama-Biden transition in 2008. David is a former distinguished visiting lecturer at the Stanford Law School, a former fellow at the Stanford University's Prescott Institute for Energy and Woods Institute for the Environment, and a former chairman of the board at the Environmental Law Institute. He is a graduate of both Notre Dame and Stanford Law School, which we, as a Berkeley alum, refer to as that other Bay Area school. Okay, thank you very much, David, for joining.
My pleasure to be here, even though introduced by a Cal grad. Clark will forgive you. It's great to be here, and congratulations to the EPI staff for putting together this terrific program. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Eric, and everybody who's been involved. So I want to give a little framing for how important this subject is. I know all of you realize how important it is. But let me put it in a broader perspective for a minute. President Biden, when he came in on day 7, a day of rest in the creation mode, not for this president, he introduced Executive Order 14,008, tackling climate change. And that executive order did some things you would expect. It reintroduced us to Paris and put U.S. back on the international stage. And in the domestic sphere, it did some unusual things in that it recognized, first of all, the climate was not the province of any one department and needed a whole of government effort. So it created my office in the White House, headed up by McCarthy, and the National Climate Task Force, headed up by all of the cabinet members and the senior executives here in the Executive Office of the President, to deal with climate on a holistic basis. But then in terms of what you would expect, a big portion of that executive order is focused on decarbonizing our economy, transportation, industry, power, buildings, all laid out. Secondly, as you would expect, a big focus on transitioning to a clean energy economy, beefing up our electric vehicles, offshore wind, onshore solar, storage, all of what you would expect. But then also an equal emphasis on resilience, and with a big lean in on nature. This surprised some folks. It doesn't surprise folks on this webinar, but it surprised other folks. It talked about, for example, embracing 30 by 30, the America the Beautiful initiative, which commits to conserve 30% of the land mass and 30% of the ocean by 2030. Talks about climate smart agriculture and forestry, doing agriculture and doing forestry in a way that's going to help the climate and make it more, and also be more resilient for those practices. Create the Civilian Climate Corps, focused on nature and helping nature do some of climate's work for it. So this emphasis on nature goes through this executive order as a major theme. And based on that, as we ramped up in the Biden administration, we realized that we needed to actually take a look at how climate impacts are hitting nature and us, and come up with some new ways of organizing around those impacts. And that led to the 5 interagency working group that Clark just mentioned: the extreme heat, the flood, the drought, the wildfire, and finally, but most importantly, and in fact, it was our very first interagency working group, coastal resilience. And that's what this group is all about. It's a terrific interagency group led by NOAA and CEQ, with a lot of participation by EPA, by DOD, by DOE, by every agency that has a stake, Interior, on our coast. And that's the interagency working group that actually focused first on nature-based solutions. And it put together a compendium of federal nature-based solutions for coastal communities, states, tribes, and territories. You can find it on the website that we have for the Coastal Resilience Interstate Interagency Working Group. It's a terrific document. Many of you probably contributed to it. And we know that coastal resilience is incredibly important because it is ground zero for a lot of the climate impacts that are occurring because of the extreme weather that we're dealing with, the sea rise, the storm surge, the battering of our coast, which creates serious issues for infrastructure, for communities, and particularly for underserved communities. I know how important nature-based solutions are to the coast because I was Deputy Secretary when Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast. Interestingly and importantly, those national wildlife refuges up the coast, Delaware and New Jersey, survived way better than those beachfront communities that didn't have the natural barriers of the coastal wetlands, the seagrasses, the sand dunes, et cetera, is remarkable. And that actually triggered Congress giving the Interior Department $400 million, which was the first time really Congress had said, put this money into long-term mitigation project work. That's what spawned things like the oyster beds around New York. And when I was Deputy Secretary, I went down to Albemarle Sound and saw what oyster beds were doing there to stop the natural erosion that was being increased because of climate change. And down in the Gulf, after the oil spill, we've seen an enormous rebirth of coastal areas with nature-based solutions leading the way to protect those exposed areas from the next disaster that will strike. So very cool. We've got the architecture in place, but two new really important developments that I want to close with that are super exciting and make this particular gathering even more important. One is we actually have money to do some of this work. It seems to me, this is my third Democratic administration, it seems like whenever we've come back into power, the vaults have been empty. There's no money to do the good things we want to do. But we had a bipartisan infrastructure law passed last year that has over $50 billion in earmarked as resilience money. And a bunch of that money, as you know, is for coastal work. Just earlier this month, the EPA announced $40 million for the Chesapeake Bay on its way to $238 million over 5 years. Also got some significant money going to the Department of Transportation for coastal areas. The Corps of Engineers already beginning to spend some money in Norfolk and elsewhere on nature-based solutions. Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the Interior more broadly, NOAA, USDA, FEMA, all are getting money for nature-based solutions and coastal resilience work. So you've got some tools now to actually show proof of concept. And what's the second big development that makes this particularly important? It happened on Earth Day when the president went to Seattle, Washington, and announced a new executive order, number 14072, write that down, 14072, entitled Strengthening the Nation's Forest Communities and Local Economies. I had the honor of working on this executive order. Its headline is Forests, because it's for the first time, it's going to inventory mature and old growth forests and on the public lands and look to protect them. Never been done before. Very exciting that we hope will set the tone for all forests, not just public forests. Secondly, it protects international forests by looking into the terrible problem of deforestation in order to clear land for commercial agricultural products, many of which we're importing into the US. So we're going to create some public-private partnerships to scope out that issue and hopefully prevent it. Thirdly, and here's the kicker for us, right? It talks about nature-based solutions. The title of Section 4 of this executive order is, drum roll, as I look to find it here, deploying nature-based solutions to tackle climate change and enhance resilience. Explaining, just like forest conservation, those are the other two provisions, so also can restoration, adaptation generate broad benefits related to climate change and other areas, other nature-based solutions. They can advance multiple benefits. These solutions include actions that protect coasts and critical marine ecosystems, reduce flooding, moderate extreme heat, conserve biodiversity, improve productivity, and to ensure that agencies pursue nature-based solutions. The following actions shall be taken. CEQ, my office, the Climate Policy Office, and the Office of Science Technology Policy, working with all of the agencies, are going to submit a report to the National Climate Task Force, which our office staffs, to identify key opportunities for greater deployment of nature-based solutions across the federal government, including through potential policy, guidance, and program changes. This is exciting. this is the opportunity that is already underway now under this 3-week-old executive order, no, 1-month-old executive order, almost today, to look at what the barriers are to nature-based solutions, questions of cost-benefit analysis, questions of information deficit in terms of understanding the what's, the hows, the cost, et cetera, of nature-based solutions. There's going to be an opportunity now and an imperative by the president to bring all the learning together and share it out. And what you're doing right now through this webinar, but also through the Green Infrastructure Collaborative, is establishing a community of practice around nature-based solutions. And what we're going to try to do under the president's executive order is capture the best ideas in that community of practice that you're advancing today through this webinar, and bring it forward and shine a big light on it, help keep the money flowing, and demonstrate the tremendous co-benefits that come when we use Mother Nature to help fight climate, be more resilient in the face of climate, and provide all of those other co-benefits that really get the heartstrings going, right? The benefits of biodiversity, of wildlife, of clean water, of the chance to enjoy a walk around, along a coast in nature, the way God intended. So it's exciting to be with you today. Hope you have a terrific webinar. You are being validated by the president as of a month ago that what you're doing is extremely important for all of us now and into the future. So thanks so much for having me. Good luck in your proceedings.
Thank you, David. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and sharing these exciting efforts related to green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Before we move on to our presentations, just a quick bit on logistics for today. We do encourage an active chat and hope that all the attendees will participate as you feel comfortable and are interested. Please feel free to share your ideas and experiences in the chat. Additionally, we have the Q&A box available. Please put your questions for the presenters in the Q&A box. We want this discussion to be interactive, so we encourage you to ask questions and share ideas. We hope to get to as many questions as possible, but we can't promise we'll get to all the questions. Please do reach out to us at the AAAS EPI Center or to me directly with any follow-up questions. We're delighted to have our speakers and all of you join us today. Our presenters' full bios, along with a recording of this event, will be shared on the AAAS EPI Center webpage. So we're ready to get started to hear from our presenters and some examples of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in Washington, D.C. So for our first speaker, we're thrilled to have Matt Johnson, a supervisory environmental protection specialist with the District of Columbia's Department of Energy and Environment. As chief of DOEE's Green Infrastructure Incentives and Assessment Branch, Matt leads the development, implementation, and adaptive management of financial incentive programs, catalyzing the installation of runoff-reducing green infrastructure in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Happy to be here, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about the district's first of its kind stormwater retention credit trading program. This is a program launched in 2013 whose aim was to internalize the externalities of stormwater management, take the realities that we have on the ground and regulatory framework adaptation in order to accelerate the implementation of green infrastructure to help restore both the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers and their contributing waterways. I'll go ahead and dive right in. To first understand why and where this program came from, we have to look at the geography of the district. The district is 43% impervious, with a substantial amount built out in areas that aren't built out, MPS properties that aren't going anywhere. And when you take out MPS properties and the waterways, the district's impervious impervious percentage is actually much closer to 90%. And with all of that impervious area, you get a lot of issues with rainfall, including runoff carrying oil and sediment, pollution, and then a little spoken about problem of significant amount of erosion. You see a picture of a colleague in mine in a stream bed that's supposed to be about 2 feet deep and 5 feet wide. That is 20 feet wide and 10 feet deep. Many of you may or may not know that there's 2 different stormwater conveyance systems in the district, a combined sewer system shown there in the yellow. Annually, we have about 3.2 billion gallons of combined sewage overflows carrying a mixed stormwater runoff along with sanitary wastewater into our water bodies. There's a multi-billion-dollar capital project going on to address the stormwater issue in the combined sewer system. But in the larger part of the district, the MS4, municipal separate storm sewer system, we often see direct discharge into the water bodies without treatment. And there's over $7+ billion of investment needed there with only $10 million available in local funds. So how do we affect change there? We implement sea change in regulations where we've got restorative protective regulations, and those have become the primary driver of retrofits in the district. In fact, our regulations account for 10 times more area retrofitted with green infrastructure than public investment can do alone. Our 2013 stormwater rule, as it was named, required green infrastructure to retain a design storm, which is 1.2 inches in most cases. Overall, it makes the district spongier, returns it to a more natural state, and is essential for the restoration of both the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers. In order to adopt this new rule, we needed some flexibility and compliance through what we call off-site retention. As you'll see there, every project that triggers our regulations has a required volume that they have to retain. They can build green infrastructure like green roofs and bioretention cells to retain that on site. And once they hit their minimum threshold, they are free to go off-site through the use of stormwater retention credits. In fact, stormwater retention credits, or as we call them, SRCs, this trading program was key to us enabling these protective regulations because the development community foresaw a problem having to comply fully on site throughout the district. Looking at how the trading program has a potential to increase retention across the district, I want to walk through an example. Our design storm, as I said, is 1.2 inches in the district. That's the 90th percentile storm. On a strict on-site regulatory framework, you have 10,000 gallon BMP green infrastructure, a lot of different nature-based solution installation, a lot of different acronyms to describe it, but you've got the retention installed on site to retain 10,000 gallons. So in a 1.2 inch storm, you get 10,000 gallons of retention. When you bring in a trading scenario, you could have 50% installed on one site, 50% installed on another site. So in that same 1.2 inch storm, you still get 10,000 gallons of stormwater retention. Where trading becomes key is in smaller storms. So rather than the 1.2 inch storm, we'll look at an example of the 0.6 inch storm. On a strict on-site scenario, you don't get 10,000 gallons of retention, you get 5,000 gallons of retention. But in a trading scenario, you get still that same 5,000 for each one of the installations. And so you get twice the amount of retention capacity through a trading scenario. I want to give an example of a credit transaction just to try and simplify this as much as possible. A condo development in downtown DC and the combined sewer system has a 10,000 gallon requirement, or SWRV. They install green infrastructure, a bioretention cell with a 7,000 gallon capacity. But because they wanted to offer some amenities in this building, like above ground parking and a rooftop pool, they voluntarily chose to take on an off-site retention volume, or an off-V. So they've got 7,000 gallons on-site, 3,000 gallons off-site to meet their 10,000 gallon overall requirement. This represents the demand in our market. As far as the supply, we've got an SRC, or stormwater retention credit generator, partners with a local nonprofit, a property owner in the district. They install voluntary green infrastructure with a 6,000 gallon capacity. They generate 18,000 credits in their first cycle. So 6,000 times 3 years, because each cycle is 3 years long. So they generate 18,000 credits. This represents the supply in our market. Then, oops, I'm a little fast there, pardon me. The condo development purchases those 18,000 credits from the SRC generator, and it complies for 6 years. So they've now privately funded the voluntary installation of green infrastructure on another private property. This brings the condo development into compliance for 6 years. After a 6-year period, they'll need to re-up, they'll need to buy more credits. And what we have seen in the history of the program is typically they go back to that same SRC generator. They've developed a relationship, they've negotiated a price point, and it's just easier to return as a returning customer. Our program overall, like I said, it was adopted in our 2013 stormwater rule, so we're a little over 8 years. We've seen 176 trades on our market with almost 1.7 million credits sold and about $3 million in exchanged currency. Right now, what we see as a trend is about 13% of developments comply offsite. And as you can see, since the beginning of the program, we've had a steady increase in the amount of credits sold each year. And we were fortunate not to see much of a downturn due to the public health emergency. We didn't see the same precipitous growth, but we do expect that to continue as well. Next, I want to talk about our price lock program. The price lock program was instituted in 2017 and represents DOE kind of putting a thumb on the scale, trying to scale up the voluntary installation, incentivize new voluntary green infrastructure in the MS4 where it does the most to protect our water bodies, and have those credits being the ones that are sold first on our market. The way that this program works, we've got our SRC aggregators. We use that term for people who either aggregate credits across multiple properties or aggregate properties, but they work as the main cog in our program. They secure funding from any number of sources, either commercial loans, grant funding, any means of personal finance. They take that money, they partner with property owners to build green infrastructure, and in return, they get stormwater retention credits. Those credits are a commodity to the SRC aggregator, and initially there are 2 ways that they can turn those credits into revenue. The guaranteed way is the price lock program itself. It is directly selling those credits to DOE, the agency I work for, in return for a preset price. The second way is the ideal scenario is where they sell those credits to the development community, similar to the condo developer who voluntarily took on an offsite retention volume and are using these credits to help comply with their regulatory requirement. Since the program launched, we have also added a kind of a third hybrid option here. That is a DOE subsidy. We are not paying as much. We're paying a very small subsidy, which then in turn lowers the price of the cost of purchase for the developer to making the purchase more attractive, and also helps to increase the volume of credits sold to the development community rather than DOE, which helps. It's a more efficient mechanism for the spending of public dollars. That money goes back to the aggregator. They've got to pay their funder back either in loan repayments, but the ideal situation that we see is that the revenue they make goes directly into building more green infrastructure, and then more credits are generated, more credits are sold, and it becomes a self-sustaining kind of cyclical program. Overall, the price lock program aim is to accelerate the pace of the MS4 green infrastructure retrofit. As I said before, the regulations are our key driver. We have other adaptive management strategies, including prioritizing the regulations to require credits from the most important areas of the city. And then we see the price lock program kind of scaling up the creation of new voluntary green infrastructure in the MS4 as kind of the third kind of level of that. All in turn, it allows DOE to exit the market, not have to put our thumb on that scale anymore, as a prioritization of these higher impact SRCs. Again, those are SRCs that are generated in the MS4 where they do the most good from new voluntary projects. And as well as when we see the ideal scenario of demand from the combined sewer system, where billions of dollars are being spent to develop subway-sized storage tunnels, we get investments from that area of the city out into the other areas of the city where we often go to see stormwater untreated into our local waterways. We have seen that, so through the price lock program, which is now relatively robust, we've got a stable group of SRC aggregators with multiple projects really bringing new credits onto the market. What we've seen is the ability to kind of take the next step, and that next step is building on that success by maximizing co-benefits without having to necessarily spend any additional DOE funding. And so over the last 6 to 9 months, we've really focused on those efforts. And the suite of programs, we've got some grant programs that exist, that buyback guarantee that I already spoke of, and our trading framework. They all help to incentivize green infrastructure and support the creation of SRC generating business. However, we've got goals of increasing outcomes for minority-owned businesses in the district, particularly in ways to reduce the barriers to funding. So people that have an interest in participating in our program, but may have obstacles to securing funding, we're designing programs to address that, trying to increase the overall accessibility to local citizens of the district, as well as enabling this cyclical abilities for when a project makes money through sales of credits, that we see that money being put right back into the program, as opposed to some other grant programs, which may be kind of a one-off, where funding is provided, green infrastructure is built, and that's great. That has got the district a lot of green infrastructure, but we want to kind of catalyze the existence of these programs and kind of layer the benefits to hopefully make it self-sustaining, to, again, where DOE can kind of start to back out of the program. So to do this, we've kind of come up with this choose your own adventure approach. If everyone remembers the books where, you're choosing A, B, or C, and then your next path, we're trying to write our own stormwater retention credit, choose your own adventure. And applicants to this program can apply for multiple funding opportunities, and they're not restricted by one or another. It's really what suits their business and, what can really help to establish them in this marketplace, because our end goal is capacity building and long-term maintenance, not only of the green infrastructure, obviously, but long-term maintenance of the local people who help stand this program up are going to be around to make sure the program keeps going, after municipal workers have gone on to different things. But in order to do that, it requires sequencing and flexibility to achieve these kind of expanded objectives across our existing framework. As I said, we're really looking at like a three-pronged approach: capacity building, funding assistance, and then sustained revenue, all leading to hopefully more and more and more green infrastructure projects. We want to leverage existing programs to increase the reach without having to increase DOE funding. The credit trading program, the price lock program, and our aggregator startup program, they all achieve the same goals that they were always intended to achieve, but we wanted to kind of stack the benefits by kind of tying these related goals in. And it takes a strategic planning, the sequencing that aligns all these goals to really impact environmental justice outcomes. And this is kind of a beta program for us, so we're excited to see where it goes, and we're excited to get feedback from the community about how else we can provide assistance. But ultimately, we've got this choose your own adventure, and we're allowing folks that like targeted communities in the district, particularly like in wards 5, 7, and 8, to choose how they want to participate, and then listen to them about how that participation can be facilitated in smoother and more engaging ways, and really trying to focus on participatory processes and making sure that rather than defining the problem we need to fix, listening where we can leverage our resources to partner with these local entities in order to achieve the same kind of shared goal of restoring the health to the Anacostia and the Potomac. Before I close, I always like to share one anecdote. I'm not from the DC area. Met my beautiful wife and moved here about a decade ago, but I grew up not thinking of DC as a river city, and I think that's a terrible shame. I think it should be the ultimate river city in the country. And I've got young kids at home, and before my work's done, they should be swimming in the rivers of America's greatest river city. Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Matt Johnson. Information on the screen there. If you have any questions, I'm happy to chat. I'm kind of an SRC nerd, so please feel free to contact me at any time. Again, thank you, Rebecca, and your staff for allowing me to present today.
Thank you, Matt. I see there are already a lot of questions for you, so we hope to get to some of them, but we will wait to hear from Jeff and Sam, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So next up, we have Jeff King, who serves as Program Manager and Deputy National Lead for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Engineering with Nature program. In addition to leading and managing a broad array of engineering with nature activities and collaborative efforts, Jeff is also advancing research and development projects. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks to the AAAS EPI Center, EPA, and you too, Rebecca, for this opportunity to be here today. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and so what I thought I would do is first start by just introducing the Engineering with Nature initiative. And as many of you may already know, we've defined engineering with nature as this idea of intentionally aligning natural and engineering processes to not only achieve a desired engineering outcome, but do it in a way that we also achieve environmental, social, and economic benefits. And all of this is done through collaboration. And I've identified the key elements of the Engineering with Nature program on the left, as well as our website. And there's a lot of content there that you can certainly check out. More information about this project, Swan Island, is also located there. So I would encourage you to visit our website and learn more about the program and the initiative. I really wanted to start by introducing everybody that is associated with this project. And there's a lot of organizations and individuals, as you can see here. Just very quickly to highlight some of what's happening with respect to the project, we had Baltimore District that was certainly the lead in terms of creating the dredge sediment through beneficial use to be able to restore Swan Island. Our colleagues at NOAA at the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science are also involved with the project, doing some of the sampling work on the island itself. Then there's our Engineering Research and Development Center, the Environmental Laboratory, as well as the Coastal Hydraulics Laboratory, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, the Martins National Wildlife Refuge, University of Georgia, University of Maryland, and then finally EA Engineering, Science, and Technology. All of these entities, academic, agency, private sector, are coming together to advance practice when it comes to islands and use of islands for flood risk reduction. And for those that may not know where Swan Island or Smith Island are located, they are located right there at the boundary of the state waters between the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland. Swan Island is actually part of the Martins National Wildlife Refuge, and it abuts Smith Island. Smith Island has these small communities, 3 of them located on that island: Ewell, Tylerton, and Rhodes Point. And for Swan Island, it is closest to that small community of Ewell. And that's part of the conversation here today. With Swan Island, you can see with the areas highlighted in red that there's a lot of erosion that is happening there on Swan Island, and for that matter, within the Martins National Wildlife Refuge. One of the big reasons why we want to restore islands like this is because of the benefit that it does afford the Chesapeake and those coastal communities. And you can see in 2017 at the top what the island looked like prior to placement of the dredge sediment, and then in 2019 immediately following placement of the dredge sediment. And you can see the close proximity of that small town of Ewell to Swan Island. These are just a couple of pictures to highlight what it looked like when the dredge sediment was being placed on the island. It began in October of 2018, and placement of the sediment was completed in April of 2019. And this was actually the environmental window that allowed for the placement of the material. About 55,000 cubic yards of dredge sediment was hydraulically placed on the island. And then that was followed by some planting that was done on the island. And you can see here 2 pictures of what the island looked like at one stage in progression of the island's maturation. Planting was completed in July of 2019 with high marsh with Spartina patens comprising about 11.6 acres, and then with the low marsh there about half an acre or so of Spartina alterniflora. And about 200,000 total plants were placed out there on Swan Island. And that's a grouping of both high marsh and low marsh plants. As part of the study, we also placed these these instruments, these platforms in the water immediately around Swan Island to be able to collect hydrodynamic data. And we collected current information and data, waves, water elevation, conductivity, a whole bunch of environmental different parameters that we could use later when developing our assessment of the island performance, and then also with development of the models. This slide highlights some of the data that was collected by our NOAA colleagues with the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, and they have actually been going out there annually ever since the project was started, collecting this data. And as you might imagine, we've got a wealth of good information and data associated with Swan Island now that we've continued to use as we develop the models that help us to understand the performance. And this is just a series of pictures that show the progression of the island and how it is maturing over time. And you can see again in the top left what the island looked like prior to placement of the sediment, then completion of the placement of the sediment in 2019, and then the growth of the plants in 2020 and 2021. And one area that I wanted to point out is where you see the intersection of these two red lines, where you see it's somewhat bare. This was an area that we recognized as needing some additional planting. And so as part of the adaptive management plan, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service went back out to the island, and this was in June of 2021, and they placed an additional 25,000 plants on the island. And one of the other opportunities that we identified was a research project in and of an existing research project where we looked at placing plants on 1 foot centers versus clumping the plants to see how well that might work in the way of creating more viability and growth potential. And you can see in the August 2021 picture that the clumping was actually working really well. So this is an interesting kind of approach that perhaps merits future consideration when looking at large projects like this. I mentioned the modeling work that we're doing, and this becomes very, very important in terms of being able to demonstrate performance of these very large natural nature-based features. And some of the modeling work that we do includes looking at historical storms. And this is just a quick sort of snapshot of the track for Hurricane Sandy and its migration up towards the New England Northeast area. And we used Hurricane Sandy in the modeling in some of the initial runs that we did for the sea storm modeling toolkit that was developed for Swan Island. And this shows just one example of some of the model outputs that we've been able to capture through study of Swan Island. And you can see on the far left what some of the wave height elevations look like with Swan Island being present in the grid. The middle shows what wave height elevations look like when you remove Swan Island from the grid and the mesh of the model. And then that difference highlights what you would expect to see in the way of wave heights and what would be considered sort of a dampening effect that occurs with Swan Island in its current state being available to reduce storm risk and also wave energy to that Smith Island area that is located immediately adjacent to Swan. So through these kinds of results, we can document the performance of these island type features, and this really does help us to prepare documentation and evidence for why these kinds of projects become important in a system like the Chesapeake. Another type of model that we are developing is what we call the Marsh transect model. And this becomes really important from the standpoint of being able to look at the natural maturation process of an island like Swan Island. And with this model, we're looking at the various transects across the island to be able to understand how the marsh grass is growing and how it is maturing over time. And with this model, then we can look 10 years out into the future to see if that maturation of the Marsh system can outcompete sea level rise. And if it doesn't, well, then there's those areas which are highlighted in red and yellow on the right side that suggest these are areas where there's going to need to be some additional type of adaptive management to be able to sustain that part of that island so that it is still functioning in a way that provides some engineering benefit. And then just really to sort of sum this up, when we talk about these models, a lot of times these models can be very complicated. And you can see here that there's a lot of information and data that goes into a model like this. And so what we're striving to do is to make the outputs from these models more understandable across all sectors and all groups of stakeholders. And so at the bottom, what you see are different renderings that show the natural progression of an island as it's maturing. And the idea here is that with the models that we develop and the outputs, that not only are we creating the numerical model traditional output, but we're also having renderings that are also created over time so that you can see what is actually sort of happening there as a result of the model outputs. And through these kinds of images, stakeholders and communities can better understand what these systems and these projects are going to look like over time, and it helps to relay the information to make more informed decisions. And so in closing, I just wanted to highlight a couple of quick thoughts that I had. And certainly in the Chesapeake and in other areas of the country, the idea of using islands for the purpose of reducing flood and storm risk really does have a lot of merit. And that's something that we're seeing with a lot of the results that we've collected. And certainly, not only are you achieving the desired engineering outcomes, but there's also an opportunity to create these co-benefits like wildlife habitat and also social benefits, recreational opportunities, those kind of things. But it really does appear, at least to me, that restoration is a wonderful thing, to be sure. But to create the real resilience that we'll need in the future, we need to be thinking about larger projects as well and to be creating more island systems. And that it would be extremely beneficial if down the road we have an ability to work outside of historical contours of islands that have been in existence in the past but have degraded. And then, of course, with these kinds of systems, these natural features, there's going to be a need for monitoring and adaptive management. These are very dynamic systems that require a lot of attention, and that's okay because we do have resources that can be made available to maintain these, and in the long run, the value proposition is extremely high. And I identified here a draft of our monitoring and adaptive management plan that's working its way through the publication process within ERDIC, and hope to have that available to the public here very soon. And then finally, with a project like this and others, partnership becomes incredibly important. There are many partners associated with this project, as you've seen, and through those partnerships, it creates a lot of financial and in-kind support opportunities. And I think this is going to be one mechanism that really does help to prioritize these kinds of projects going forward. And certainly when thinking about a project like this and all the partners that are involved, there's many, many ways to amplify the messaging and be able to reach a larger group of stakeholders to be able to offer real-time information and lessons learned. And certainly with something as large as a project like this and as complicated as a project like this, maintaining that core leadership team and having frequent meetings and offering updates and ensuring that the technical teams are certainly moving along on the identified milestones and what needs to happen in the way of timing becomes absolutely critical. And I've included a link to one of our web pages to be able to learn more about this project. And so with that, I want to close again by recognizing all of the many individuals that are working on this project and certainly very appreciative of their time and their expertise to make this project happen. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you for sharing about this collaborative nature-based solution in the Chesapeake Bay. It's very exciting to see and hear about it. Next up, we have Samantha Rashko, who is a life scientist and a grants project officer at EPA Region 3 in the State and Watershed Partnership section. She's been with EPA for the past 6 years, and her focus is on green infrastructure, managing state grants, and science communication. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to Jeff and Matt for those very informative presentations. I'm going to share my screen. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a program that I have been working on since I started at EPA, and kind of give you a quick overview of how the program runs and a little bit about the success we've had in the past. So the program is called Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns, but that is a mouthful and I did not name it. So we usually just call it G3. And the program really consists of a really strong partnership between EPA Region 3 and the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I believe we're going on 13 years. The program started in 2011. It's of course a grant program. We try to focus for the most part on small to medium communities. We've gotten a few bigger communities like Lancaster and others, but especially Baltimore. But for the most part, we try to focus on the smaller communities, you know, so they can get their feet wet. And lastly, it is a way to support the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. This program really supports the restoration goals of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and other watershed plans within the Bay. So next we have some of the G3 goals.
Hey, Sam, sorry to interrupt, but we don't see your presentation.
Oh no.
No problem.
Let me see if I'm able to fix that. I'm just going to back out of it and then try to go back into it.
There we go.
Are we seeing it now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know, because I would have just kept talking. So the goals of the program have remained the same, you know, since its inception, and that is to help communities develop and implement plans that reduce stormwater runoff, increase the number and size of green spaces in urban areas, improving the health of local streams and of course the Chesapeake Bay, and enhancing the quality of life, community livability, and economic vitality of these communities. So I just told you guys a little bit about the goals of the program, but really the backbone of the program has been this focus on greening streets. For those of you who don't know, this is just a street with green infrastructure using any of these BMPs listed here. There are a lot of others as well. A lot of communities get creative, but for the most part, it's just street trees, you know, rain gardens, pervious pavement, bioretention cells, bioswales. Other methods have been used in the past, but these are kind of what we stick to. We have a lot of bump outs. We have a lot of these like tree planters that you see here in the second from the left picture. So yeah. And what does this program fund? It funds a few other things that are not listed here, but for the most part, we really focus on design projects, both conceptual and engineered. Conceptual is more, you know, figuring out where you might put a green street, if it's actually feasible, and then engineered is what would be designed right before implementation to actually, you know, do the calculations of if this is a possibility and what the slope and all that would look like and where the rainwater would actually be directed to. And then of course, implementation, which is the actual construction of the green infrastructure. And then lastly, we focus a lot on these community greening projects, which is kind of open-ended, but a lot of the projects that come in for this category are things like greening vacant lots, tree plantings, anything that can increase canopy and native plantings in an area. And these are some of the amounts that we typically would award for each category. These caps can be exceeded, but this is where we like to keep the baseline. This is pretty close to what we've seen over the past few years for all these categories, but I'm anticipating some higher construction costs in the future. But for now, we've kind of found that these amounts have worked really well for the program. So next, who can apply? Basically, I would say any like not-for-profit organizations can apply, but local governments, nonprofit organizations, neighborhood community associations, and other nonprofit entities. The only caveat here is that communities applying to this program would have to be within the Chesapeake Bay portion of EPA Region 3. So the whole Chesapeake Bay Watershed, excluding New York, because that's Region 2 EPA. This is a little bit about the application process. For those of you that are interested in applying or learning more about the program, I would say reach out to me directly or visit our website. But the RFP does open usually the first week of December, but we're always trying to advertise year round, closes in March. We are looking for, in particular right now, like a lot of communities who haven't had the opportunity to apply for green infrastructure in the past. We're trying to get those communities off the ground. This is some of the scoring criteria here. It's pretty standard, justification, project success, climate resiliency. These are always changing. We're moving toward incorporating more environmental justice concerns and just resiliency in general in the next round. And then for application review, this is just, a panel that comes together every year. And they are usually experts in the field and from all the states we have this program in. And the projects are ranked and scored, and then we make a final decision around the May-June timeframe. This is a little bit about the history of the program and the success we've had. There's been over 13 million awarded. We've had 231 projects since 2011. 23 million was matched by the communities who have applied in the past, and that's pretty impressive because this program doesn't actually require match. So when we do get match, I think that really shows the investment that the communities are making to, be successful in this. 18 miles of green streets designed and built, 215 acres of impervious surface removed, over 200,000 square feet of bioretention, over 82,000 native plants and 11,000 native trees. And we always try to engage a ton of volunteers and community members in this program. So as you can see, it's over 14,000. This is from the past year in 2021. We awarded 1.3 million. That's a pretty standard number for what is available each year. We're hoping to see more in the future always, but it's been kind of consistent with the 1.3 mark right there. And we awarded 32 projects. Again, this is just kind of an overview of what's been awarded in the past. And I like this graphic because it breaks down the types of projects we fund and where we're funding them. So, we've done about 46% of the implementation and community greening, 36% of the designs, and we have 18% of white paper funding that we do. And this is particularly important right down here. the awards by state. We have awarded a lot in Maryland in the past, so I really would like to get some interest from other states within the Bay watershed. As you can see, this is the map of areas we've awarded in the past. We do have a lot in Maryland, and we're always looking to kind of move outward into other states within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This is some of our nutrient and sediment reductions that we've seen over the last few years. The darker the color, the higher the reductions. So this is pretty impressive for such a small program, I believe. So we're always, trying to capture the difference that this program has made, not only in, unification and, creating like water quality benefits for community members, but also, seeing the actual reductions and the data in the water quality changes. So next I can take you guys through some examples of projects we've done in the past. Marietta is a particularly impressive example for this program because they first applied in 2018 and they were awarded for a conceptual design, and they completed that, and that's what you can see in this top picture. And then in 2019, they were awarded for engineering design, and that is the lower picture, and that was completed. And then in 2020, they came back in for implementation, and that project is now in progress. So that's pretty cool to see, start to finish this community's Green Street journey, and the success they've had overall because of this program. Next, we have another project that I really love. This is in the town of Bath, West Virginia. Some of you might know this community as Berkeley Springs, but they came in for a G3 award. I believe this was in 2019. And this was, as you can see in the left picture, this was a street that had a lot of flooding. A lot of business owners were having issues with water coming into their business, and here in the middle and the right, you can see the changes that the G3 program, made for them, and it just really gave them an opportunity to like boost business and have a great place for community members to walk and spend time outside. Next, we have another project example, which is the James River Association. This project was in Virginia, I believe Richmond. And this was also an implementation project. And it had 0.4 miles of Green Street installed, and really just created a safer space for communities, community members to walk and spend time outside and get involved while improving the water quality in the area. And then I have a few lessons learned. We've really seen a lot of success in this program when we've, focused on plan integration and community involvement. We've seen a lot of communities like have workshops before they actually apply for a G3 grant, and that's been really successful, just so that there's like a clear idea and there's no surprises amongst the community when things like this, get implemented. Again, pre-application planning, charrette site identification, grant writing skills. I realize that communities that are small to medium sized don't always have a person on staff who are able to write grant proposals, but that really does help when we're getting these applications, having a person dedicated to at least the grant writing skill set and, figuring out what the community can actually apply for and manage if they are awarded. And then lastly, I would say starting small has been really beneficial for this program. The reason that I, really think this program has a lot of success is because it funds things like conceptual design and engineered design. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't come in for implementation, and design all in one. It just allows a step-by-step process so that the community doesn't take on too much right away and is, there's a phased system set up. And that is it. Is there any, I think we're going to do questions after, but yeah.
That's right. We will have some time for questions. So thank you all for these wonderful presentations and examples of how green infrastructure and nature-based solutions are addressing needs around our region. Before we move into questions, we have 2 short poll questions for the audience. So if you could take just a couple of seconds to read our questions. So the first question is, what types of case studies and examples would you like to see that highlight green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? And you can select all that apply in this case. So if everybody could go ahead and let us know what types of case studies you'd like to see. And then second question, what do you consider to be the dominant hazard in the Mid-Atlantic and Chesapeake Bay region that green infrastructure and nature-based solutions need to address? In this case, you can only pick one. And you'll have to answer both questions to submit your answers. I see lots of folks answering. Great job. We're still getting lots of folks giving us their answer. It's like waiting for popcorn, just waiting to see when the number stops going up. All right, well, we've had about 67% of you, 68 participate. So how about we end the poll now? And we can see, and this is super helpful for us as we start to plan how we can share information going forward. So really appreciate this. And we can see for the first question, there's lots of interest across these different examples. And then for the second question, for the Mid-Atlantic and Chesapeake Bay, it's flooding and coastal resilience as our major hazards in this region. So really appreciate you all providing us that information. We will go ahead and move on to the question portion. I'd like to welcome an additional discussant to our conversation. We have Crystal Lehman, who specializes in climate resilience and energy policy. She currently serves as the Deputy Director for Climate Resilience at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and she will help share some of the perspective from the White House. So welcome, Crystal. And then
Thank you, so happy to be here.
Thanks. Matt, Jeff, and Sam, if you guys want to come back on. I'll start us off with this question. What are some best practices you recommend for directing investments in green infrastructure and nature-based solutions toward frontline communities? Jeff, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, Rebecca, thank you. I would say from where I sit that there are opportunities, I think, to pursue projects with the Corps, with local communities serving as a sponsor for a project. And so if there is interest on the part of the community to pursue some type of natural infrastructure or natural infrastructure in combination with some other, what I would call conventional flood risk reduction project, that they can get in contact with their local district and pursue funding that is meant to be a cost share as part of a planning study with the Corps of Engineers. And that's one way that I can see a community being able to pursue a project focused on flood risk reduction that includes natural infrastructure.
Great. Matt, was there something to add there?
Sure. I think that from a policy perspective, one of the best practices is the transition of nature-based solutions or green infrastructure or LID, whatever you want to call it, into the perspective of being an asset. For me, far too often, you're having these discussions and you need funding to proliferate these practices, but they can be seen as fluff projects. And while there's like a lot of emphasis and there's a lot of people on this call and all of these like kind of big movements going on now, there's still a lot of the purse strings, so to speak, that don't view these as assets to a community more than just something green or something that can have like positive impact both socially, environmentally, looking at both health and human services, and really changing the perspective of what green infrastructure can mean to a community, as opposed to just like a more expensive, less effective way of dealing with environmental concerns.
Yes, excellent points. Sam, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I would just say that, from some of the examples I've seen, integrated planning has been really helpful. So like working across multiple departments in your community and getting buy-in from all of them. And then also actually getting community involvement before green infrastructure is applied for or considered, and including people along the way. We've seen a lot of success in that in our smaller communities.
Great, thank you. That's all very helpful examples and information for us. I'll ask another one of my questions. In your experience, what information has strengthened decision makers and communities' commitment to green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? Samantha, do you want to take that one first for us?
Sure. I was just thinking about this question. I don't know if this is the environmentally savvy answer to give, but I really feel like when we see projects with a lot of aesthetic value and that helps the businesses, wherever they're implemented, I guess when they have a lot of demonstration value, not only for water quality benefits, but also for local business and, actually allowing people to have a safe space in their community. I feel like that's something that strengthens decisions on this, and just, creates a want, like, that's not just like, oh, we can't see water quality benefits, but we want beautification. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Jeff or Matt, did you want to add?
Jeff.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
This is one of my favorite topic questions when you come on panels like this, because across the industry, what I've thought we've been lacking for a while is a way to monetize the co-benefits outside of water quality. Water quality is actually really easy data to present to people. If they understand it is one thing versus another, but it's really tangible empirical data. And where I have seen the industry have some roadblocks is about how you actually monetize the other benefits, thinking about health and human services, thinking about beautification, thinking about additional green space, thinking about the reduction of urban heat island effect, and the mental therapy that can occur from living next to like a large green space that like some residents don't have. Like, I would love to see a concerted, effective, and consistent effort across all of the municipalities to use the same terminology, the same vocabulary and really the same like dollars and cents to be able to drive these conversations with more efficacy.
Yeah, and Rebecca, if I could just quickly add, one of the things that really has jumped out to me, and I work sort of at the very front end of these ideas for natural infrastructure, with part of my program being very heavy in the R&D side. And sometimes it's very difficult for people to wrap their minds around what it is that we're talking about when we describe natural infrastructure and how it will sit on the landscape. And then also, how will it function and what are those associated benefits? And we've found that when we get landscape architects involved very early on with projects and have those landscape architects there with everybody else in the room to be able to visually depict these different types of features and what they'll look like over time, and then have that perspective of the environmental and social benefits and how people interact with it, then people can really start to gravitate towards this idea of having natural infrastructure be integrated into their communities, and then also have it be part of a broader system scale type of intervention when it comes to creating resilience.
Rebecca, if I can add, if that's okay.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
I think folks brought some really good points up, especially the co-benefit portion of this conversation. I mean, we look at, a lot of the beautification, however, it's a lot of decarbonization, a lot of the fact that you can be a much more resilient community when you have certain nature-based solutions implemented in the area. Unfortunately, a lot of the metrics sometimes are not reflective when we just make these decisions. But really a big one that we've seen is, avoided losses is one that the FEMA uses. But also there's other ones that can actually be implemented once you actually start looking in the details about how this infrastructure can be put into play and actually benefit not just the community, society, but also disadvantaged communities. So I think overall, I really like the conversation about early buy-in. That's very, very important. We don't see enough of it. And the communities that do that have huge lessons learned, and making sure that everyone's around the table to have this discussion, because one solution might not fit for every community, but that community decision point is fairly important.
Yes, all of these are helpful ideas and examples of what's working and where there are often barriers. So any of you are welcome to answer any and all questions. And if you have questions for each other, feel free to ask each other to clarify or elaborate on interesting ideas. So I do have a specific question for you, Matt. So what room for improvement is there that agencies can make to benefit cost analysis definitions and calculations to advance green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in frontline communities?
Thanks, Rebecca. I think this will be a little bit of a mishmash of what I've spoken about previously, and I think this really goes into getting multidisciplinary buy-in. Can be the most effective approach, and making sure that you're having the appropriate conversation with the appropriate agency on a municipal level. Before anything of a large-scale program like this that gets put out to the public, even, you've got stakeholders across 9 different administrations and many agencies, and you can't talk to your Department of Public Works the same way you do your Office of the Mayor, and you can't talk to them the same way you do your Department of General Services. And so having an understanding of the audience that you're speaking to, and not translating into their language, because you're likely going to get it wrong, but understanding what they are asking you to present to them, and then being able to turn that around with your subject matter expertise has been key for a lot of the programs that DOE has stood up. But then it goes back to what benefit is this bringing over another program? I think I saw a couple examples of this in the chat of tried and true gray infrastructure. You build a pipe does something like that, versus convincing people that nature-based solutions not only can do that job, could do it more effectively or cheaper to repair when you're talking about just triage, but also provide a host of other benefits that you don't get anywhere, and how you can kind of stack these outcomes to really affect long-term change is been a tremendously effective tool for us.
Yeah, very helpful. Jeff, did you want to add anything there?
I guess just sort of building on that, when we talk about the co-benefits derived from these projects, and that's really, the gold standard for nature-based solutions and really wanting to achieve much more than just a desired engineering outcome. But I think it's also important for us to really communicate that with these systems, these features, they are very dynamic, and that it looks a lot different in terms of the long-term management strategy than, say, conventional infrastructure. And what we should be communicating is that is okay, that we're going into this knowing that with these very dynamic systems that we will have to periodically come back and, for example, add sediment or ensure that the vegetation is performing optimally, and that we have a system that is integrating well with the landscape. And over time, provided the conditions are right, that adaptive management should be less and less of a requirement.
Yeah, excellent points to share. So I think I'm going to ask one more question since we're focused on a regional approach. What examples of regional collaboration can be shared and applied elsewhere in the country? So what about unique projects or innovative funding opportunities? And Crystal, I might start with you for federal opportunities and then kind of bounce around.
What was great is that David spoke about this at the top of the webinar. We have one huge opportunity, which is the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that is really a once in a generation type of investment into our communities. And a huge chunk of it, around over $50 billion, is dedicated to resilience. And we want to actually see efforts being proposed that utilize nature-based solutions. I think some of the new programming is going to be very significant. And David did mention we just put out a nature-based solutions compendium. So stakeholders that are on this call and stakeholders elsewhere can see some of the direct opportunities that they can apply for that would then help their community establish a nature-based infrastructure or green infrastructure. There's also, and I don't want to forget about them because they're so significant, there are also programs that have been around for quite a long time. And what's great is that communities and states and territories and tribes have access to these programs. So what I'm talking about FEMA's Public Assistance Program. I'm also talking about HUD's CDBG program. What's great is that those funds can actually match each other and they can be utilized for nature-based solutions activity. FEMA was great, and they actually put out a nature-based solutions document to showcase the various activity that can be accomplished, which I think is a great step forward. And other agencies too, such as USACE, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and others have actually been following those leads to be able to showcase that their funding opportunities can be utilized for nature-based solutions. So overall, I think we're at a tipping point. What's great, David mentioned that also we had an executive order that came out on Earth Day that directed not just US GCRP, the Global Change Research Program, to really look at the assessment of nature-based solutions, but also to have a document developed by agencies to be reported out to the National Climate Task Force that showcases these activities in regards to what needs to be done next to actually move the needle on nature-based solutions. So overall, I think this is really the prime time to start really thinking heavily and start planning, because honestly, there's going to be funding coming out the door, and having the opportunity to have shovel-ready projects, having the stakeholder engagement in place to have an understanding of what your community is actually interested in will be a really great step forward in actually pursuing more projects that can not just be, no offense to seawalls, but not just a seawall that can be put into place, but also something that can help with the flood inundation and also the coastal erosion that we're seeing in place. I also have one other item I want to showcase is that this coastal resilience IWG is a really foundational one. It was one of our first ones that we put into place at the White House. And there's a reason for that, because we're constantly seeing so much of the population having to kind of rediscover their area because it's changing so much, and also having to consider other alternatives because their home itself is in danger. So I think overall this conversation and the type of opportunities that we're seeing come into place is really important for the ongoing success of communities in general.
Yes, great to hear about these federal opportunities. I think I'm going to quickly ask Sam to say one thing that she thinks other regions could be doing, like the program she mentioned, because we know that it's only for those states that you highlighted. So what do you think the other regions could learn from what you all have been doing?
Well, every EPA region has, a green infrastructure coordinator or green infrastructure team lead. But also every EPA region has, an asset like the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, the Chesapeake Bay is unique and it gets the funding that helps G3, be a program. But I think something that I feel strongly about is that this program is not a lot of money, but it's had a huge impact. I mean, I know that $1.4 million can seem like a lot of money, but it's really not, to fund 32 projects. So, doing a lot with a little bit of money is just the way these programs have been for a while, and it's actually been really beneficial because it, I think, encourages communities to come up with their own funding and their little piece of investment to help propel them forward and to actually buy in and care about the maintenance of these programs. But yeah, I'd say like that's something you can apply on a national level. I've tried to definitely coordinate with other green infrastructure coordinators at EPA across the country and tell them about G3 and the success of G3, but it is unfortunately specific to the Chesapeake Bay.
Yep, that's helpful to remind us of those opportunities. So before everyone leaves, we have one more set of poll questions. So these we'll leave up and we won't share the results. So this is for us to learn about whether this webinar has introduced you to something new or provided you with helpful information. It's whether you'll share something that you learned from this event with your colleagues. And then lastly, will you apply something that you learned from this event in your work? So we're always trying to find new ways to learn about the effectiveness of our programming. So we're trying this poll. We also will have a survey that asks a little bit more detail and allows you to write in some answers, and that will pop up at the end. So we appreciate all of our speakers and discussants and keynote address from David Hayes, and just appreciate all of you attending this and sharing your questions and experiences in the chat, as well as the Q&A. The recording of this event will be on the Epicenter webpage. I will send it out to everyone who registered for the event once we have it posted. So you will get that along with resources that have been shared. And if we can, we'll get some of those questions that you all put into the chat and in the Q&A that we didn't get to. We'll try to get some of those answered from our esteemed panelists. So thank you very much for attending and making it this far. And the cat has arrived. So that's the end. Thank you all so much and take care.
Thank you.